Welcome to another episode of Conversations on the Couch. I'm Dr. Danielle, and today I am really excited to have two of my colleagues here joining me to speak on Black men in higher education settings. And I'll introduce or allow them to introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Curtis. If you can just say a few words to the people about who you are and what you do, that'd be great.
Hi all, my name is Dr. Michael Curtis. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Family Social Science. My research focuses on the developmental consequences of marginalization, particularly related to mental health and traumatic stress. My work, especially as a marriage and family therapist, really focuses in on interpersonal relationships with romantic partners, or family members, or siblings, and things like that.
That's great. Thank you for that. I wanted to be in the couples and marriage and family work before, but that's a lot of work. There's a lot of work, a lot of dynamics. Yeah.
It's a fun time. Couples are my favorite.
Okay. Well, someone's got to do it. So I appreciate you doing the work for us. And I'll turn it over to Alex.
So my name is Dr. Alex Proctor. I'm currently the Interim Associate Director of Counseling Services for Morehouse College, as well as a staff therapist for Morehouse College. I think in terms of my research interests, they have shifted dramatically from being predominantly focused on sports psychology, trauma, and chronic pain to now being on the stigmatization of mental health within the Black male community specifically, but also understanding the impact of that on the wider Black community. I think overall my interests also would include contextual behaviorism, because I really feel as though people utilize roadmaps for how they understand and make decisions. And so if we can understand the context in which people, learned how to do one thing, then we can help them change that and make it more functional elsewhere.
I love that. Thank you both for being here. I think we've got a great conversation ahead of us. So join us on the couch as we get into what it is like to be a Black man in higher education, and what are some of the obstacles and how we might overcome those challenges for future generations. So stick around. So I know for me, as a Black woman in psychology, it was an interesting, challenging experience to be a part of the doctoral program. And I'm curious about what led you both to being in the mental health field and also wanting to practice it in a higher education setting. And to tack on further, what was your experience like in your respective training programs? And Alex, let's go with you first.
Okay. So I think the most important piece to start out with as it relates to my background is that I went to college not because I thought it was what I wanted to do, but because I thought it was the most effective pathway to becoming a professional athlete. And so as I was made very critically aware of the fact that professional athletics was not going to be the career that I was going to have for the rest of my life, I started to consider what felt like it connected to me as a person. And naturally, one of the things that I was drawn to was the cognitive and mental and emotional side of sports and athletics in general. And so I think that was the first thing that kind of opened the door for me to really study psychology in earnest. From there, I had an understanding that my extended family in particular, is a little bit different, I think, in terms of how the types of privileges that they had compared to me growing up. And that made me consider and reflect on the fact that there was a lot of substance use and abuse concerns within my family historically. So when I started my master's program in clinical psychology, it felt natural to look into substance abuse and trauma and to move into that area. However, as my training continued, I realized that it just wasn't inherently fulfilling. And so I started to really consider what other forms of clinical practice I might be able to go into. And really, I guess that's my, roundabout way of saying it has been a meandering journey into the field of practicing psychology and into college counseling as a whole. I really thought that I was going to be working in as a athletics department sports psychologist at some point, and then found that college students overall really were individuals that I felt I could have an impact on in terms of where they are developmentally. So that's a huge roundabout way of saying I got here by really trying things that I loved and trying to fit that into fit my passions into the work of psychology overall. And that has been an incredibly fruitful, though challenging journey at times. In terms of my doctoral program, it was definitely an experience that I am still making sense out of certain pieces of it, even to this day, despite officially graduating 4 years ago. And so I say that to say that I attended the University of Denver, which I have to say I had an amazing educational experience. I learned a great deal. I think my clinical practice is at the quality that it is because of the education that I received. However, the lack of effective supports for me as the only Black male that they had admitted into the doctoral program in 3 cohorts. And if I'm not mistaken, I was the only Black male in the building for 2 full years before they had someone in the master's program or invited another Black male into the doctoral program. And so I say that to say there were numerous moments of racial challenges that made me question my fitting into academia and higher education as a whole. But I think it also created a level of resilience for me that I can now try to teach my students and clients going forward. I wonder if there's more that I should say in this moment. But I will actually oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I chuckled at one point when you were speaking because there was a telltale sign, I think, that I found with people, especially people of color, Black people who have been in higher education or who have higher ed degrees, that there is a careful choosing of words, right? And it's like challenges, and there's often a pause as you kind of think about how best to express what was happening in a way that's, maybe a little bit more politically correct. So no, I appreciate you saying that, and I recognize it because I too said interesting and challenging and unique experiences. Yeah, so I appreciate that. How about you, Michael? I'm curious to hear about if your experience was similar to Alex's or perhaps different.
I'm just gonna go there. It's fine. I'm an assistant professor now. I got the job. They can't fire me yet.
I'm moving there.
My journey was pretty bumpy. So I was sort of my parents' restart baby. So both of my parents got lost in the crack epidemic of the early 90s. They both did stints in prison, and when they got out, they met at a sort of like second chance program situation. And they got together even though they weren't supposed to. And they had me. And I was sort of there like, we are going to be on the straight and narrow now, and we're going to like start over. So they invested a lot of time and effort into making sure that I got an education. And I am the 4th of 5 children for my mother, and my father's only son and first son. So there's a lot of narratives all wrapped into that happened. And so from like birth, I knew I needed to do something. And so for the longest time, I wanted to be a lawyer. And then about junior year of high school, I found out lawyers had to read a lot of boring legal documents, and it was not for me.
Mm-hmm.
No, not for me. So I was like, so junior year as a freshman, I'm like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life because that's not going to work. And I took an AP psychology class, luckily, and I fell in love with psychology. And so I did my undergrad in psychology. And during that time, I took a human sexuality course in the marriage and family therapy department. And I loved that course. I loved my mentor and the professor teaching that course, and I ended up being a TA for that course for my junior and sort of sophomore year, my third and fourth year of my undergrad. And that was great. So got on the clinical psychology application beat and applied to 10 schools. Everyone's hyping me up. They're like, you're a shoo-in. You've done all of this research. You've been a TA, applied to 10 schools, got accepted to one. And it was one I really did not want to go to, where one of the professors during my interview told me that I was too smart to be there. So that wasn't going to work. And I talked to my mentor, and she was like, maybe just do a master's in marriage and family therapy. I think you have the way you see the world is much more aligned with the systemic perspective. So I ended up doing that, and I fell in love with that training program, and I loved working with families, and I loved working with couples. But that training program was, for the lack of a better word, hell. It was extremely clinically rigorous while making 10 cents over lunch money. So I actually took a pay cut from my undergrad to my master's program, because just time wasn't gonna work. We had class for 3 hours every day, and then right after class, we had clinicals. From class would get out at 4, we would be in the clinic until like 7 or 8. So really the only time you could either work was you were either working overnights or you were working mornings. And I just couldn't juggle that. Couldn't happen. So my clinical training was rough. It was a lot of growth as a career person, but also just like very strenuous on my body. Just trying to keep up with that schedule. Got my master's degree, that got done. Then I ran away and I worked at the Las Vegas Discovery Children's Museum for about 6 months. That was great. I didn't have to do any clinical work, but I got to work with adolescents who I love working with. So that was great. And then I moved to Georgia to do my PhD. That program was a journey as well. The University of Georgia is 2 hours outside of Atlanta, and Georgia is a very red state. Not only am I Black, I am also queer. So to be in rural Georgia as a Black queer man is not fun, and it doesn't feel the safest. But I got a lot of support, and funny enough, which I've actually heard multiple times by other Black queer people, my saving grace was a full professor, a white Jewish full professor who was like, I know you're going through hell. Come to my lab. I will protect you. And it will just be you and I, and we will get you over the finish line. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And I say that with the caveat of I started off my tenure there under the mentorship of a woman of color, and it was not great. Not great. Which was very shocking to me because I went to that institution specifically for her, which we can talk about later. That whole experience has changed like how I mentor my own students and how I go about talking about what higher ed looks like for students of color. And we can talk about that later. Yeah. So I got that done.
Quite the journey there. Wow. I've had different experiences than the both of you. I think I started off very early, just kind of cycling through the different doctors or lawyers that I could be, right? Because as an immigrant, right, it's either an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. And I didn't want to read the boring text, and I also didn't want to see the immediate impact of me not doing my job well, right? So I was like, I don't want to see someone literally die in front of my eyes. Or, they're just like, okay, well, it's time to escort you to the prison cell. I was like, I don't want any parts of that, right? So I landed on psychology pretty early and just kind of stuck to that path. And, I was kind of privileged, to have the support of my parents. And, I'm wondering about the importance of mentorship, right? Especially when it comes to people of color, right? And Michael, we could talk about like when mentorship or representation goes wrong. But I didn't have a mentor until I would say I was in my master's program. And I didn't realize how important it was because up until that point, I was just making lots of decisions just with very little knowledge, doing my own research, not really understanding what path I could take and what steps would be needed. So I kind of just fumbled my way through it. But thank God for Dr. Carolyn Springer. She saved my life in my master's program. And I said, I'm going to follow you to the doctoral program as well. To this day, she cannot get rid of me. So let's talk about mentorship for Black people, Black men, and how important that might be in this higher education process in terms of like getting a degree and even working in that space. And either one of you could kick it off.
Well, I did want to jump in really quickly, Michael, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Because in listening to both of your journeys, I think one of the things that I am sitting with, I'm not sure if it's like an internal smile or frown. I can't really tell what it's doing inside. But like my thought was around how, Michael, you went there specifically for a professor of color to be your mentor and you were let down. And I think you said it was a Jewish white woman who ended up wrapping you.
Cis white man to be
Cis white. Oh,
to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. That came in and was like, I'm gonna wrap you up and make sure you make it through. Danielle, you had a mentor that you developed that relationship with in your master's program and then took that into your doctoral program. I did not find an effective mentor until after losing 40 pounds over the first 4 years that I was in school, because I was working 3 jobs, 2 practicums, and going to school full time. I was told to ask my parents for money by my advisor, who ended up being kicked off of the teaching diagnostic like assessment courses because he was utilizing eugenicists and like well-known racist authors in psychology to teach all of us. And so he told me to ask my parents for money because I went to a school that was on a full ride, but it was $70,000 a year. So yeah, I couldn't do any of that. Fast forward to first internship, and I ended up having to resign with the support of my program. And then my program essentially blamed it on me, told me that my ADHD that I never told them about was the reason why those things had happened to me, despite my numerous attempts for finding a mentor. Their attempts to connect me with a mentor was at 23 to send me to a guy who was 77. And I know ageism is a thing, but in this sense, coming from Baltimore to Denver to work with somebody, to be sent to somebody who has lived in Denver their entire life and doesn't understand the cultural differences of the East Coast was a lot. So until my resignation from my internship, I did not have a mentor. And then finally, Dr. Terry Davis was willing to take over as my advisor. 2 years later, I finally graduated. So it was just intriguing to me that it switched to this conversation so quickly, because I don't know what it's like to actually have an effective mentor, because after she became my advisor, I got to internship finally, went on internship, and the pandemic hit. By the time the pandemic was over, she was at a different university. And I was still kind of doing the thing of just looking around, seeing what I might like, and trying to teach myself as much as I could to be effective. So I think mentorship is huge, because without it, you kind of scramble a lot.
I would agree with that note. And I think also, as I think many of us are like first generation doc people in general. So like how we language and talk about what a PhD is also sort of throws it, makes mentoring such more critically important. Like a PhD is just an apprenticeship program. Like it's an apprenticeship program with a fancy title. It's we're no different than the people who spend 4 years learning to be a plumber or learning to do sprinkler systems and things like that. So if you don't have that critical mentor to teach you all of the soft skills that they can't or don't teach in class, you just don't learn those things and you just don't get those experiences. Mm-hmm. And then by the time it's over and everyone graduates, because programs try to push everyone out, you can definitely tell those who had mentors who invested and poured into them and those who didn't. And I was, I want to say, if she ever watched this, the person I went to UGA to work with, wonderful woman. I want to say that she is a beautiful soul, wonderful woman, always checked on my like emotional and mental health. But it was very clear that mentored me to be a professional and to like do research was not her priority. Things were happening in her life at the time and her students were not her priority. And that was very clear. And so about my second year, I was left with this choice of, I watched one of her students graduate and struggle to find a job. And they told me, they literally sat me down and was like, jump ship now. Someone who's really going to pour into you and who clearly like wants to do this work. And I had to make the tough decision of leaving someone who clearly cared for my well-being, and to like take the leap of faith, to go to someone who might not have cared as much about my well-being, but who could give me the soft skills that I needed and could get me the connections I needed. And that was really hard. Luckily, it worked out. He checks on me all the time now, and like, we're great like this. But it easily could not have. And it was definitely a complete career-related decision and not a personal one. And that makes it hard too, when like you're with people for 4 years, it's gonna get personal. So that's a struggle. But I think mentorship, especially for first generation people in early career, whatever, regardless what career you're in, is so important. Because the rest of the world just assumes we know things. And a lot of the times, even at this stage, people just assume we all had the same training just because we have the same sounding degree. And that's not true. Every department does stuff really well and not really well. And so we all have our blind spots, and having a good mentor can help you articulate what you're good at and downplay what you're not so good at.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Were you going to say something else, Alex? You wanted to add to that?
No, I think I just want to say louder that I appreciate what was just said.
I think it makes or breaks any job, if we're being honest. But in our career, where really we are our product, how we sell and language and put out the package that is us really determines on if you're going to thrive or not. And you can only learn those things through good mentorship, unfortunately. They can't put it in a book, even though people have tried. Many people have tried. There's thousands of books out there, but it's nothing like getting it from someone who's actually invested in you.
You know, I will say this. moving out from beyond my actual doctoral training, once I got to internship the second time around, and then to my postdoc and to my first professional position, genuinely, those were the times in which I ended up with really great mentors. And so I guess as I was listening to Michael, the thing that I did feel was necessary to share is that it's also feasible to later on in your educational professional process and career like journey to find folks who can help you fill in those gaps, while also acknowledging, at least for me, there are still areas in which I know I have blind spots. And I have struggled, I think, as a Black male, wanting to find another Black male psychologist or clinician that is at least similarly educated, to help teach me things that, in a way, it feels like only another Black male psychologist can. That has been a bit of a challenge, because when you look for someone, they check all the boxes and all that stuff, and then they still are unable to provide that mentorship. It leaves you feeling a little bit lost, like in the previous parts of the training process.
My Dr. Springer, right? This woman stayed with me until like 5 a.m. in the morning to write my dissertation, right? Because it was not happening outside of her office. I would go home, say, yeah, I'll write something, and I'd come back and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't write it. So she would stay with me overnight on campus, right? She would do her work and I would do mine. I'd say, how did this sound? And that is above and beyond anything that I could have expected. And I am always so thankful to have met her and have developed a relationship with her. And I think to Michael's point as well, right, around the soft skills, I was in my second year when the 2016 election happened. And I just remember feeling like a stranger, alien, out of place in this predominantly white institute, even though they will say it's not, whatever, right? And just not knowing who I could talk to and what is appropriate to say, how can I express the emotions that were coming up. And I just remember knowing that I could go across the campus to her office and that would be a safe space. And I think that what's coming to mind around like the disappointment that can occur sometimes when we put Black people, right, regardless of their position, on this pedestal is like, you are the sole Black person here, you must help me navigate these waters. And that's a lot of pressure, right? Do you guys have that experience where you find that your students, Black students or students of color, tend to gravitate towards you? Because I know her office was always full. And she's like, yeah, come on in. And I have, 12 lab mates while other groups had 3 or 4 just because students of color were gravitating towards her. So I guess the question here is, do you feel that pressure to be this like representative for the Black community, for Black men in your positions?
So I think our roles are a little different, so I think you'll get different responses. So in my role, I directly mentor students. So there is a pressure, but also I think an expectation that I put on myself to do that a little bit, because what I've realized is if we don't advocate and we don't talk about our experiences and we don't support our students, no one else does. Or if they do, they mention that it's a problem in a meeting and don't actually do anything about it or take the extra step to actually like reach out to the student. We'll have multiple conversations about how someone is struggling or like not getting it or is not progressing. But then I'll ask, so has anyone talked to them? And then silence. So I think I feel I personally feel a need to be like, well, if no one's going to take the step, I'm always going to take the initiative, which is how we end up doing a lot more of that informal mentorship that we don't get credit for because these aren't our students.
Right.
These are somebody else's student. Or you get to the point where you have 6 or 7 advisees. I luckily don't yet, but it's not unheard of. And that I think is an effect of where the industry is right now. We have such a huge, especially in the field, I would say I'm in human development mostly, but we have such a huge divide between, we have tons of full professors who've been at these institutions for 20 years and new people like me who just started, and there isn't a lot of people of color in the middle. So you're seeing a lot of very distinguished people of color who truly are on their way out, being burdened with this until they're able to sort of fill in the middle at this sort of a level, which is interesting. I'm curious on what sort of happened in the institution for that to occur, or like what happened in like the early 2000s, where either lots of people of color left, or just didn't progress for one reason or another. But I've noticed that huge divide.
I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of the differences of experiences, because so having gotten my doctoral degree in Colorado and living there for 11 and a half years, if I'm not mistaken, working at the Mental Health Center of Denver, I was the first Black male clinician in the child and family outpatient clinic. And like most of my other training or practicum or whatever positions out there, I was the first or only Black male doing any type of mental health work in that site. And so it was a constant challenge of how much of this can I actually absorb without having enough social support and like social structures in place of folks I could go to share that kind of burden. I think, Danielle, you mentioned the 2016 election. And so I was on internship at the Mental Health Center of Denver at the time, the first internship that I resigned from. And I had a caseload that was all Black and brown adolescents and young children. And every single one of them had a concern about their safety and well-being after that election. And I think I did the best job that I could in supporting them, providing them with effective resources, all that kind of stuff. But then the toll that it took on me of having to be that person for them at such a tumultuous time socially and individually was a challenge. And I found that continuing throughout my second internship, my postdoc, and my first position, where they hired me because the students had requested a Black male therapist. And so it was like, you fit the bill and we like you, come do the job. I had a Trinidadian woman as my boss, and I love her to this day. Dr. Gail Bruce Sanford, just so everybody knows, phenomenal lady, amazing mentor, all the things. But even she was aware that I had a caseload of 120 students at the time that I left, because the need needed to be filled. And so that pressure is huge because there's this awareness of being one of the only that I think brings pride, passion, ambition, but also forces you to really learn how to hold some stuff still to yourself, some energy, some empathy, and some compassion, because it can be a heavy lift.
It absolutely can be, right? Dr. Kirkland Vons was one of the only male Black psychologists in my doctoral program, and the Black men that were part of the program gravitated towards him, even if they weren't necessarily in his research group, but certainly just to speak to him and have like a face that looked like you and was welcoming and kind of supportive. And, you know, both of you mentioned support, right, in some regard, where you're offering support to these students who are having a difficult experience or challenging experiences. And I'm wondering about the support that these institutions that you work for have been a part of. What is it like? Is there sufficient support? Is there insufficient? What is the quality of it? Not only for you supporting the students, but for the students as well.
I think it is a mixed bag. And I say that because of the 5 higher education institutions that I've worked at. Only one has been an HSI, so a Hispanic Serving Institution. The other, another one is where I'm at now, Morehouse College, which is an HBCU. And so I would say those 2 institutions in particular, after my arrival, what I saw was a constant effort to improve supports, not just mental health supports, but financial, food security, housing, academic, and so on and so forth. Because I think that the institutions I worked at that are serving marginalized populations have a greater awareness of the lack of resources that may already exist when those students come into college. On the flip side of that, the other 3 institutions I've been at, I think tend to cater to more affluent white folks. And so as a result, there's this individualistic kind of approach where like the things are there, people will find it. That's kind of just how it goes. And so I guess the support for the staff and the faculty kind of falls along those same lines for the smaller institutions, the ones with marginalized populations as their primary focus, tend to do more to support their faculty and staff because of the weight of the burden that they are attempting to carry.
I think in thinking about that, and thank you for sharing that, Alex. I'm actually hope what I say doesn't invalidate what we all just said about mentoring a minute ago, but students and early career people of color are over mentored and underfunded. Everybody wants to donate. I won't say everybody because sometimes it doesn't exist in institutions at all. But the institutions that want to do it, they're like, yeah, we'll put together this free mentoring program where you have to find time out of your day or your week once a week to meet with a stranger from a different department who's going to tell you how to be successful. And while mentoring is so good and is so great, and I don't want to invalidate anything we said before, because all of that is just as important. And where's the money? You can keep your thoughts and prayers. Where's the money? If you know that Black early career people are already coming in at either a funding deficit or an experiential deficit, instead of putting the onus on us to sprint and catch up, why aren't there additional funding for people of color or first generation early career people who haven't learned these soft skills, or a training program specifically for us that would allow us that sort of equalization of things? Because it's compounding. So if you already start behind, by the time you reach where the rest of your white colleagues are, they're already so far ahead of you. It's hard to bridge that gap.
Right.
And then we're inundated with so many other things, committees and students, which I think we love doing and love being a voice of. But at the end of the day, those things don't get us long-term success. Those things are only small markers that we can use to get tenure if we're teaching. It's not the hard stuff that our external colleagues are really going to be looking for. So I would say that one of the supports that's often missing is the structural supports, the money to either protect your time to learn new things or learn the skills you need to learn, or investment financially into your research that honestly is harder to collect. You know, if I'm collecting data on Black Americans, I can't just like go to the Psych 101 class and ask all of those kids the same battery of questions. Like, I recently did a move here to the University of Minnesota. So I have to learn the history of Minnesota. I got to figure out where the Black people in Minnesota are. I have to make connections with them. And all of that takes time. And that time is money. So all of that takes money as well. So I'm not producing the same amount of papers my colleagues are, or writing the amount of grants my colleagues are, because they can just ask randos on the corner about the big five, and start publishing off of that. And that is fine with what I'm doing. So I think the financial investment from the industry has yet to be made. But I also think that a lot of institutions say they want to support students and then or early faculty. And then when we tell them exactly what we need, they're like, oh, well, we can't do that. But we'll do this other free thing that you have to find time to do. And that's not as helpful.
Yeah, show me the money, right? Yeah. Yeah. And that last point in particular about like, you know, yes, we hear you and we want to improve all these things, but yet the work still ends up being on your plate, right? I've never seen any faculty member of color just doing one thing, right? And because you're supporting all these students and you're on these the DEI committees, right, and the academic and all these other asks that they have of you, that you don't have the time to do your research. And then there's a question of like, well, why aren't you producing at the same rate, right? As if there's like some kind of lack in your academic ability or prowess, and not considering these intangibles, even when they are clearly stated to you repeatedly. Yeah, so very good points there.
Yeah, Michael, I just want to say that I don't think that you invalidate the point about mentoring. I think you kind of further drove it home, because in a lot of ways, mentorship is set up for Black and Brown students and first-gen doctoral students as well. Are always, people are eager to connect you with so on and so forth. But it's like, hey, this group of older Black psychologists meet at this person's house that they've been meeting at for the last 28 years straight, show up at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday, even though we know that you work till 2 o'clock in the morning. Show up at 7:30, go meet these people, find your mentor, schedule something with them. And I'm like, but I also need to go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning to pay for the gas that it will require to get to their house. Or I could not pay for that gas and I could pay for food. And you expressing that to them and them hearing the concern, but not providing the structural supports for you to be able to resolve those issues in a way that, honestly, I think the word I'm looking for is dignified. I think there's a lack of understanding that an individual's dignity is also tied to their ability to achieve when trying to traverse academia. And if you can't identify the resources and then more steps are put in front of you, that can be quite demoralizing.
Okay, because let's talk about it. Let's really get into it. Let's get into the money, because this is a good segue. Because let's talk about it. The amount of free labor that we have to do is crazy making.
God awful. And I was a society, so it's even worse.
My husband is not in academia at all. He works as an insurance claims adjuster. But when I explained to him how practicum works, I pay the institution to work for free, to do sessions for free that they charge for. So technically they're getting paid twice and I'm getting an education. Okay, sure, that's fine. But then also, we're also seeing, mostly in the mental health field, like the average student who's going to these master's programs are older. So these are people who are taking breaks from working full-time, nice-paying jobs to go to school, and then you don't make any concessions either because classes are only offered once a semester, and they're only offered from 1 to 4, and there are no other options.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What?
Mhm.
What? And then you're wondering why people of color aren't applying to these programs. Well, if you're trying to recruit from a population that is already struggling community-wide with socioeconomic disparities, I can't take 2 years, if I'm lucky, of making nothing.
While paying a lot.
No, wait. It's not making nothing. It is losing money. To
Yeah,
be specific.
there's that.
It's losing money. Because that debt line or debt meter continues to rise.
Mhm.
And I had a full academic scholarship, and yet I still have over $100,000 in debt. Been on a scholarship at everywhere I've gone to school.
Mhm.
I just don't come from money. So everything extra, like housing, buying a car, paying to cover that car. Yeah. Getting to the practicum site that doesn't pay you, that's 40 minutes away from your school. It's a lot.
Yep. And also, let's talk about like the relationship between some of these practicum sites and the institution, because the practicum sites want you to like show up and dedicate time and do all of these things like it's a real job.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
This is not a real job, Susan. This is I love, obviously I'm gonna be professional and I'm gonna show up on time and do all of these things, but like I need you to take a chill pill. If I don't have a session, I'm not coming in to twiddle my thumbs for the week just because you need another body. This is your business. Get the people you pay to show up.
Mm-hmm. And then set reasonable standards and limits on what your trainees can do. Because I think the reality is the trend that I'm seeing is a continuous move away from actually setting up training manuals that have structures in place to protect the trainees. That move away from structure, I think, is advertised and promoted as flexibility for the students to be able to make schedules and their administrative time work for them. But in actuality, what it does is it makes students even more beholden to that institution they're getting their training from, because if you've not really understood how everything works, you're going to be constantly showing up trying to catch up, and then you have to ask more questions and you got to spend more time there, and then suddenly your caseload that was supposed to be 10 is 15 because you weren't able to check if your schedule was actually aligning with what they told you was an appropriate amount, and then it's 15 to 20 and so on and so forth. And so seeing that, it is a worrying trend that I think actually following the APA's apology for supporting racism and systemic oppression. It's a weird trend to see that is how trainees are being treated now, because I feel like it pushes people of color further and further away from wanting to get into a field where they're going to be further exploited.
I mean, the inflexibility of a lot of these programs make it very difficult for even me to have some conversations with students who've reached out to work with me in the past. In that, like, at my last institution, when they were like, is this a good program that a mom could work at and like go to school at? No. I'm like, it's unfortunate, but like I have to be like, no, it's not a good fit. Like, we only get so many years of guaranteed funding. That means you have to take so many classes. And if you try to deviate from that at all, you have to eat that cost. And it's prohibitively expensive. And inflexible too. Like, I did my program, they've luckily switched some of the requirements now, but we had to graduate with 1,000 clinical hours. So we were able to bring 500 from our master's program, and then we had to do another 500 in the 4 years that we were there. That's on top of our research hours, because those two things didn't overlap. And on top of our normal classes, because we only had to take practicum for like a year. So you were getting these hours,
Yeah.
however you got them. And that made it very difficult, which is why they've recently changed the accrediting standards, like nationally, but that's no longer a requirement. But it was very difficult for a lot of people to pull off and to finish.
Perspective.
Yeah. Lots of sleepless nights, long hours, working through lunches, right? A lot of burnout, tears for sure. We've definitely covered quite a bit of the challenges. And, one of the things that I recently heard is that we don't really need more mentors, but we need more sponsors, right? And that back to the show me the money, where the money resides, right? So we've talked about the challenges. Now, I don't want to discourage anyone that might be interested in getting a higher ed degree or moving into the higher ed field. What are the good parts? What are the welcoming bits that you would say keep you there, or even drew you to it initially?
Michael, I need to organize my thoughts. So if you have a response already, please go ahead, because I got so many thoughts.
I do, luckily. For me, it's purpose. I get a lot of intrinsic value from working one-on-one with students and watching them develop and grow over time. I get a lot of value from helping people through my research and giving communities voices to their experience, where it's either displayed in one particular way, which for Black queer people tends to always be through the lens of HIV. And our experience is so much more than that. Or learning something new. So I get to learn something new every day, even outside of my own little silo of information. Like, I love working with some Indigenous scholars here and learning about their communities and sort of the intricacies of that, because I don't know none about that, and I don't even like. I don't know. So I think the novelty of my job in my industry gets me excited to come into work, and then to be able to see and work directly with communities in ways that I want to. Also, it is pretty exciting for me. No one dictates what I research. I have academic freedom. So that comes with the good and the bad. But that also means I can follow my passions, even if they change. So that's a lot of freedom there. For anyone that's ever interested in higher education, especially the PhD, I always ask them, what do you want? Like, what are you hoping to accomplish and achieve? And what is the path of least resistance to do that? I remember one student, she had graduated with her master's in MFT, and she was like, I just want to write books. You don't got to be a doctor to write books. Just write it. If you think a doctoral degree is going to make you a better book writer, no, bro. You just have to start. And so I think sometimes people create these fictitious barriers on what they could do and be, of like, I can't pursue this until I've reached this threshold. And it's like, no, you just got to take the leap of faith, and follow your passions and what's important to you.
I love that.
Man, I shouldn't have let you go first. Here I am overthinking it as usual. And actually, that'll be the way that I lead into this, is that I think one of the reasons why I believe folks should not be deterred from going into the field of mental health, psychology, marriage and family therapy, that umbrella as a whole, is that the ability to appreciate humanness is something that I think is unfortunately lacking as a result of the generational traumas, systemic oppression, and violence that we've experienced as a culture. I have a privilege of being able to see myself as human at all times. And I truly think that is a type of privilege that if you are interested in this field, you deserve to be able to experience, and you will, after all the hard work and sacrifice and all the things that we already talked about. But nonetheless, I think the other pieces that really truly make this worthwhile is that though I present in a way that has led to some question marks about how Afrocentric I may be and things of that nature, my background, and one that I don't need to defend or explain, is one of intense love for Black people in general. And I appreciate that the idea that, or concept that it takes a village, is truly ingrained in almost every type of Black person that I have ever met across this country and this world. And so psychology and being a psychologist in a way allows me to contribute to that kinship and interconnectedness in a way that, if it's not obvious, I'm struggling to even articulate, because the impact that I have is quietly massive. So if I see 120 students at Morehouse each year, say there's 6 people that are important to them in their lives, and the impact that may have, from that 6 people to 6 people each for them, and so on and so forth. I don't know. It's incredibly fulfilling to have at least a small hand in addressing the generational curses that we all carry with us in some way or another. So yeah, I don't know, it's super healing in a way that doesn't feel selfish. And I think that's hugely important too, because it allows you to stay humble about the work.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just remarking on how beautiful your answers were.
We're bad at that.
Yeah. I was going to build a little bit off of what Alex said as well, of all of us, our work with clients, just our presence within the field in general, I think affects people exponentially, in that it only takes one positive experience with a mental health professional to completely destigmatize things and be like, oh, they're just a person, and it is not some woo-woo fancy magic that's going to happen when I walk into this room. And I think for so many people of color, where therapy has been either talked about, like not talked about at all, or demonized, giving spaces to talk about it and talk about our experiences and what it was like for us training, just changes things completely for some people. And I think that change with some people, I've seen it, they take that into their communities and their networks, and they push people in those networks to challenge those assumptions as well. So that also is one of the reasons why I continue to do this work as well. Of, as long as I can touch one person a year, I know that I'm having an exponential effect, and that keeps me going.
The word that came to mind was accessibility, and in a lot of ways. And Michael, I've been able to share this with him in the past. Like, I'm actually taken aback at times when students express like the impact that I have had, or any of the clinicians that I've worked with have had. And I guess the thing that matters most to me and that keeps me coming back is that I want mental health services to feel accessible, because they already are. I'm living proof of that accessibility. But I don't know that it feels that accessible. A thing that has always eaten away at me is this concept of continuously teaching folks about, in training, being blank slates. And I think that what I have learned is that a blank slate is a really easy way to lose a person's investment in therapy. And so showing ourselves as humans truly does, like Michael said, in that one moment with a good experience with a provider, it destigmatizes the whole process and has huge ramifications across like multiple systems.
I'm just super thankful to have spoken with the two of you today. And for a little behind the scenes information, I'm supposed to be pausing and, feeding questions, and this was all organic, right? So just really grateful to be a part of this moment and to have this conversation with the two of you and to hear your passion about the work that you do, despite the challenges, despite the bumpy road in getting here. Just really wanted to say thank you for the work that you do. I don't have any money to give you, but hopefully, this conversation and us just being in this space together can lead to more funding because of the necessity of the work that you both do. So really thankful. I want to say big and deep gratitude to both of you.
Thank you for creating this space and inviting us on. Spaces like this are growing, but I still think they're too much of a novelty, and we should be having these conversations more readily and open everywhere.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say I would second that part. I don't know. There's just something really beautiful about looking at the screen and seeing the three of us having this conversation together. So, as well, like Michael said, thank you for holding the space and for inviting us here.
No, of course. I'm honored, and I'm not, gassing you guys up. This was a really great conversation, and to note that we probably didn't touch any of the questions that I originally wanted to ask, but I think that what we spoke about was what was needed today. And the final question is, what brings you joy, right? For me, it really is important to not be so serious all the time and to actually enjoy elements of life. So I'm curious about what brings joy for the both of you.
I got a couple of answers. So since I suck at being concise, I'm going to go first and try to actually be short. I would say, as it relates professionally, the thing that brings me joy the most is that I've always, when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a father. And somehow that has translated to something I say multiple times, which is my job and the job of everybody else that works on that campus is to take care of other people's children. And so it brings me joy to know that I'm committed to caring for another person's child the way that I would want my own 2.5-year-old son to be cared for. And that's my segue to saying he brings me so much joy. It's kind of hard to think about anything else. And that is something that keeps me going because I just want to be a decent model for him and be as healed as I possibly can be for him as he gets older. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
That was so wholesome of you, Alex.
I'm very wholesome.
Wholesome. I love it. And anyone who knows Alex knows he's obsessed with his son. It is
very much so. He's like the best thing in the world.
Yeah. Storytelling brings me joy. Either creating stories or consuming stories. So I love television and reading and even like music storytelling. I've always been obsessed with the medium. And if you haven't gotten through this, I'm a narrative therapist as well. So like those linkages are just always there. I'm fascinated with how we use language or even sound to articulate the world around us and how limiting words are to actual experiences. It's just a fun thing to work at, and it brings me joy.
Thank you for sharing that. For me, professionally, it's that moment when a client might say like, oh, God, let me tell you what happened this week. Or as I've been referred to as my client's professional homegirl, right? Those moments where I can connect with the client and that I am a part of the lifestyle, right? And a part of their world and their experience. and they feel comfortable sharing with me not only the heavy stuff, but the day-to-day things too. And just being able to create that space, particularly for clients of color who, and I think Alex, you might have mentioned this before, or maybe it was Michael, just around like how stigmatizing mental health can be, and to have them come and just be themselves and their authentic selves as well. That brings me a lot of joy. So again, really, really thankful for the position that I am in, not only as a therapist, but now as an aspiring podcaster. And, just happy to have conversation with two wonderful men, Black men, in the respective fields that you're in. Super thankful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So if you have made it to the end of the episode, thank you so much for joining me on the couch. I'm Dr. Danielle. Now remember, whatever you hear on this channel and in today's episode does not replace a wonderful, caring, warm relationship with a licensed mental health professional. I hope that you found the things here enjoyable, educational, and that you'll take it to your friends, your family, your coworkers, or just anybody who's open to hearing more about mental health and about the therapists and clinicians and people in the mental health field that are doing the work. If you like what you heard, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. I would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Until next time, I'll see you on the couch. Be well.